In the untamed Oklahoma Territory of 1878, cowboy Hank Keller arrives in Tahlequah burdened by a past he spent years outrunning. Determined to live quietly, he keeps to himself, until he meets Abigail Kincaid, the fierce, sharp-witted saloon owner who sees straight through his guarded silence. Their connection sparks slowly, dangerously, as shadows from both their lives begin to close in. When powerful enemies threaten Abigail's livelihood and Hank becomes a target because of his past, they must stand together or risk losing everything. What begins as a fragile spark becomes a life-changing love that transforms Hank's wounded heart forever. Sparkles Part 1, A Guarded Heart in the Dusty Frontier, 1200 words. In 1878, Hank Keller rode into Tahlequah with the slow, weary gait of a man who had spent too many years running from the same shadows that clung to him like dust on an old trail. His horse, a graying roan with ribs half visible beneath its hide, moved as if it, too, carried the burden of Hank's memories. The Oklahoma Territory stretched around them, wide and raw, the kind of land that swallowed secrets and never asked questions. Hank preferred it that way. Questions led to answers, and answers led to the past, something he promised himself never to revisit. The town of Tahlequah buzzed with life in the late afternoon sun. Wagons rattled along dirt streets, cowhands shouted across the road, and distant hammering echoed from a blacksmith's shop. To most men, it was ordinary noise. To Hank, it was a welcome distraction from the silence that had followed him across too many lonely miles. His first stop was the Saloon, a two-story wooden building with swinging doors that creaked with every gust of wind. A faded sign read Kincaid's Parlor, painted with a flourish that suggested pride rather than extravagance. Hank tied his horse to the rail, dusted off his coat, and pushed through the doors. The moment he stepped inside, he paused. The saloon wasn't like the typical frontier watering hole. Sure, there were cowboys playing cards, miners fresh off the trail, and the usual haze of cigar smoke hanging low, but the place was clean, orderly, even polished. Lamps glowed warmly along the wall, and a piano sat near the corner, though no one played it. The air carried the scent of cedar and something faintly sweet, like vanilla. And then he saw her. Abigail Kincaid stood behind the counter, wiping down glasses with a practiced rhythm. She was not the sort of woman one overlooked. Her dark auburn hair was pinned neatly, her sleeves rolled just enough to reveal forearms toned from hard work, not softness. She carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had learned long ago to rely on no one but herself. Her sharp green eyes flicked between customers, missing nothing. When those eyes met Hank's, something shifted. Not much, a flicker, a breath, but enough for him to feel it. He wasn't used to being noticed. Most people glanced at him and looked away, sensing the hardness in his jaw and the cold stillness behind his eyes. Abigail didn't look away. She studied him, not with suspicion or fear, but with curiosity. As if she saw something beneath the dust and the scars. Hank forced himself to move toward the counter. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice steady and warm, with a hint of caution earned through years in a business where caution kept you alive. "Whiskey," Hank said, though even he wasn't sure why. He rarely drank. Whiskey tended to stir memories better left buried. When she set the glass in front of him, he noticed her hands, steady, capable, and gentle in a way the frontier seldom allowed. "You new in town?" she asked. "Just passing through," he replied, though the words tasted false the moment he said them. Abigail raised a brow. "Most folks who say that stay longer than they plan." Hank didn't respond. He wasn't here to stay. He wasn't here to make friends, either. But he couldn't deny the strange calm that settled over him in her presence, something he hadn't felt in years. He took a sip of whiskey and let the burn center him. Abigail moved down the counter to help another customer, but Hank found his gaze following her without meaning to. She moved with confidence, each gesture measured, purposeful. It wasn't the beauty that drew him, though she had that, too, it was the strength. Hank admired strength. He understood it. He lived by it. But what he didn't understand was kindness. He had forgotten what that looked like. Over the next few days, Hank meant to leave, but somehow he didn't. He told himself he needed rest, that his horse needed more feed, that he still had money to earn before he moved on. But deep down, he knew the truth. Abigail Kincaid kept him in Tahlequah far more than any practical reason. He returned to the saloon each evening, always sitting in the same corner, always swapping a few quiet words with her. Nothing urgent, nothing deep, just small talk that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to matter. He asked about the saloon. She asked about his travels. He offered to fix a loose board outside her back door. She insisted on paying him but slipped him fresh bread instead. Day by day, he began to feel the weight on his chest ease. Abigail had that effect. She never pried, never pushed, she simply saw him, really saw him, without asking for anything in return. One evening, as a storm rolled across the plains, Hank walked her home. The rain hammered against rooftops, and thunder cracked overhead like a warning from the heavens. Abigail held her lantern high, the warm glow lighting the narrow path. "You don't have to walk me," she told him, though her tone carried more appreciation than protest. "I know," Hank said simply. They walked in silence, the kind that felt comfortable rather than heavy. At her doorstep, she turned to him. "You're different from the others who come through here," she said softly. "That good or bad?" Hank asked. "Ask me that again in a week." He almost smiled. Almost. Abigail hesitated for a heartbeat before speaking again. "Whatever you're carrying, it doesn't scare me, Hank." The word struck him harder than any bullet ever had. Most people found his silence cold. She found it honest. Hank swallowed hard, unsure what to do with the warmth rising in his chest. "You don't know me," he whispered. "Not yet," she said, eyes steady on his. "But I'd like to." That night, Hank lay awake listening to the rain, replaying her words. Something was happening, something he hadn't expected and didn't know how to stop. Each moment with her chipped away at the walls he'd spent years building. Abigail Kincaid was not just a saloon owner. She was a force. A light he didn't believe he deserved. And yet she looked at him as if he wasn't broken. As if he wasn't dangerous. As if he could be something more than the man his past had shaped. For the first time in years, Hank Keller felt a spark, small, fragile, but undeniably real. Hope. A hope that maybe, in this dusty frontier town, he could finally lay down his ghosts. A hope that maybe, just maybe, he could stay. Sparkles Part 2, Love, Danger, and the Road to Redemption, 1200 words. The weeks that followed were some of the calmest Hank Keller had known in years, until they weren't. His growing closeness with Abigail Kincaid did not go unnoticed in Tahlequah. Her saloon, once simply a gathering place for tired cowhands and dusty travelers, had become the center of town life. And where there was life, there were men who wanted to own it. It began quietly. A stranger loitering outside the saloon past closing time. A broken window one morning with no culprit in sight. A whispered warning from a ranch hand who claimed certain men didn't like the shift in town power. Abigail brushed it aside at first, but Hank felt the change like pressure in the air before a storm. Trouble had a scent, and he'd lived too long with it to miss the signs. And trouble arrived in the form of Clyde Hensley, a man whose name alone was enough to drain color from the locals' faces. Hensley ran half the gambling dens between Fort Smith and the Red River. He wanted Tahlequah, and to him, claiming a town meant claiming its heartbeat, Abigail's saloon. Hank first saw him during a busy Friday night. Hensley strolled in wearing a slick smile, polished boots, and a coat stitched from fancy Eastern fabric. His eyes, however, were cold. Cold as a grave. "Miss Kincaid," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Fine establishment you run. Shame if anything happened to it." Abigail stiffened. Hank stood from his table so sharply his chair scraped against the floor. Hensley shifted his gaze. And you must be the cowboy I've heard so much about. Abdullah Keller, is it? Hank, he corrected. Ah. The quiet type. Hensley's smile widened, but the corners never reached his eyes. Quiet men are dangerous. They think before they act, and when they act, well, things get messy. Hank didn't rise to the bait. He simply stepped between Hensley and Abigail, his posture calm but unmistakably protective. This ain't your town, Hank said. And this sure as hell ain't your saloon. Hensley chuckled. We'll see. From that moment forward, danger dug its claws deep. Within days, Hank became a target. Men shadowed him at the stables. Someone tried to spook his horse by slashing its flank. Another time, 2 hired guns cornered him behind the general store. They didn't expect him to fight back with the cold precision of someone who had seen real violence, who had lived it. Hank walked away with a split lip. The 2 men didn't walk away at all. That night, he went to Abigail's house knowing she'd worry, but even he wasn't prepared for the way her voice broke when she saw him bruised and bloodied. Hank, please don't shut me out, she whispered as she cleaned the cut on his cheek. He swallowed hard. I don't want you hurt because of me. You think I'd rather be safe without you than in danger with you? Her eyes glistened. You matter more than my fear. No one had ever said words like that to him. No one had ever believed in him enough to hold him steady. In that moment, Hank decided he would fight for this woman, fight for the life she made him believe he deserved. But the worst was still coming. One moonless evening, as Abigail prepared to close the saloon, the doors burst open. Hensley strode in with 5 gunmen behind him. Tonight, Hensley announced, voice dripping with satisfaction, Tahlequah gets new ownership. Hank stepped out from behind the bar, revolver drawn before Hensley even registered the movement. Gunfire exploded like thunder in a canyon. Tables splintered, lamps shattered, and the piano's final chord never finished. Hank fought with the ferocity of a man who'd spent his whole life battling shadows. But this time, he wasn't fighting to survive, he was fighting for Abigail. 1 gunman went down. Then another. Hensley retreated behind a pillar, firing wildly. Hank! Abigail cried, ducking as a bullet cracked the mirror behind her. He moved without thinking, pulling her behind the counter just as another shot whistled past. Stay down, he murmured. But... Abigail. Please. Her breath hitched, but she nodded. Hank rose again, firing with deadly precision. The last of Hensley's hired guns fled out the door, leaving only the outlaw leader himself. Cornered, panting, Hensley raised his hands. All right, Keller, no need for this. We can make a deal. Hank's jaw tightened. I don't deal with men like you. Before Hensley could react, Hank fired 1 final shot. Not to kill, but to send the bullet grazing Hensley's hand. The man howled, dropping his gun. You ride out of Tahlequah, Hank said coldly, and you don't come back. Hensley scrambled backward, clutching his bleeding hand. You'll regret this, he hissed before disappearing into the night. But he never returned. After the chaos settled and townsfolk helped clean the saloon, Hank walked Abigail home through the quiet, star-filled night. Neither spoke at first. The adrenaline still raced through their veins, but beneath it was something deeper, something solidifying between them. At her doorway, Abigail turned to him. Hank, you saved my life. And you saved mine, he replied softly. In more ways than you know. She reached up, brushing her fingers against his cheek. You don't have to run anymore. His voice cracked. I know. He sank to one knee before he even realized what he was doing. Abigail gasped, covering her mouth. Abigail Kincaid, he said, voice shaking with emotion he had hidden for years, I ain't much of a man. I've done things I'm not proud of. But if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making things right. With you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Hank Keller, she whispered, yes. 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was small, held under a cottonwood tree beside a clear running creek. Friends gathered, the preacher spoke, and the wind carried the scent of wild prairie flowers. Abigail looked radiant in a simple white dress. Hank had never stood so tall or breathed so freely. When he kissed her, it wasn't just a vow. It was salvation. A new beginning. Their married life unfolded with warmth Hank had never imagined possible. He built a small ranch house on the outskirts of Tahlequah. Abigail filled it with laughter and light. Soon, she told him she wanted to start a family, a future Hank once believed he didn't deserve. But now he believed in tomorrow. Because he believed in her. And she believed in him. Hank Keller's guarded heart, the heart hardened by years of loneliness and pain, finally found its home. In Abigail. In love. In redemption. And the dusty frontier, once a place of ghosts and wandering, became the land where Hank Keller's life truly began.